Hello there. I'm Kios, the Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the rise of ancient Mesopotamia. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this will be a light introduction to ancient Mesopotamia. So, if ancient Mesopotamia after this piques your interest, then I highly recommend you go out there and do a little bit of your own personal deep dive. Now, this article was written January 14th, 2021 by Sarah P. Young. Ancient Mesopotamia and the Rise of Civilization. In ancient times, Mesopotamia, meaning a land between two rivers, was a vast region that lay between the Tigris and Euphrates river system. And it is where the civilization emerged over 7,000 years ago. The first inhabitants, the Sumerians, established an advanced system writing, spectacular arts and architecture, astronomy, and mathematics. The Akkadians would follow the Sumerians, borrowing from their culture, producing a new language of their own, and creating the world's first empire. Mesopotamia corresponds to what is now Iraq, Kuwait, eastern Syria, southeast Turkey, and parts of the Turkish, Syrian, and Iran Iraq borders. The region encompassed some of what is known to be by historians as the Fertile Crescent. The conditions in the Fertile Crescent, which also includes the Leviathan coast, the Iranian Iraq modern border, and significant ancient sites such as Göbekli Tepe and Jericho, made it ideal for agriculture. All eight of the founder crops of Neolithic agriculture, the wild forms of emmer wheat, barley, flax, incorn, pea, lentil, chickpea, and bitter vetch, were found in abundance along the easily domesticated animals, pigs, sheep, cattle, and goats, with horses nearby. The Sumerian people who were first settled in Mesopotamia were some of the oldest known farmers, and they began to settle villages there around 8000 BC. From humble origins, the settlement blossomed into the earliest large scale civilizations. The Mesopotamian legacy includes organized government and religion, strategic warfare, and the base six method of telling time we still use today, and literature. Their demise finally came in 539 BC when Babylon fell at the hands of the Achaemenid Empire, marking the end of thousands of years of innovation and cultural growth. Now, if you're someone like me personally, I always like to think of the notion of the pre diluvian civilizations and their contributions to restarting our current time of civilization. And I think that's something to definitely take into consideration when you do your own personal studies and research into many of these ancient civilizations. Let's continue. From tiny villages to mighty cities. There are a few moments in human history which mark significant points in our physical, behavioral, and cultural evolution. Walking upright, learning to use and create fire, making tools, and beginning to talk are some of the earliest milestones of our journey But one of the pivotal leaps of our ancestors made was from an unstable life as nomadic hunter gatherers to settlers with permanent residence. And here we have an image of a restored ruins of in ancient Babylon, Mesopotamia. So we got ourselves an old city. Now, if you follow Jimmy Corsetti from Bright Insight, a phenomenal channel, he's been covering recently how they have been covering ancient sites that have been discovered. They're re-burying ancient sites and covering them up. And he also brought to attention on his Rumble page. I'm not sure if he covers it on YouTube anymore, but you can also check it out on Twitter. That the World Economic Forum has essentially forbade any more archaeological digs into Göbekli Tepe. Um, One would ask, why does the World Economic Forum have any say in archaeological decisions that fundamentally impact our understanding of human origin and civilization? But that's a conspiracy for another time. But just something to keep in mind that they're doing some really funky stuff right now in archaeological community. But let's continue. The conditions in the region were perfect melting pot for this change. The number and kinds of animals in Mesopotamia meant that people did not have to follow herds of steppe animals as they migrated. The cereals, grains, and legumes in the Fertile Crescent could be harvested in enough numbers that could be stored to provide subsistence over the harsh winter months. This lifestyle both required and enabled the building of more permanent structures. Caches to store grains and shelter for domesticated animals were needed, and housing followed suit. As animals and crops were domesticated, harvests grew, and the number of people that could be supported was increased. Villages joined or expanded naturally over time. They grew into cities. Developing cultures. Mesopotamia was not the first society with a distinct culture. The people of the European Upper Paleolithic produced exquisite artwork such as painted caves, carved Venus figurines, and personal ornamentation such as pieced ivory beads. With extra time on their hands, the culture and skills in Mesopotamia were able to develop further than before, than ever before, reaching new heights. While the Venus figurines of European Upper Paleolithic are relatively simplistic statues, the carvings produced in Mesopotamia were elaborate and exquisitely detailed. A collection of around 27 statues depicting Gudea, a ruler of an ancient Mesopotamian city, has been found in the south of the region. Here we have one of those said statues of Gudea, the a ruler of ancient Mesopotamian city. The realistic representations of a real person, with details such as draped fabric of his outfit showing the skill of Mesopotamian carvers. Mesopotamia art is compared to that ancient Egypt for its intricacies and grandeur, with beautiful carved cylinder seals and the Urk vase being just two examples of the art of the people were exposed to on a daily basis. Now, one thing I might have to push back on a little bit personally, now there could be some conflicting evidence to what I'm saying, but I did do an episode covering the Denisovans, uh, which were ooga boogas, essentially, but they were cavemen, but they created exquisite architecture. Well, not architecture, but exquisite jewelry. Now, if you go, you can check out my live stream on that where it's called The Legacy of the Denisovans. And, the Denisovans, if I remember correctly, uh, were they pre-Diluvian or post-Diluvian humans that were still very, what we thought were very basic in terms of their lifestyle and living, but it turned out that these Denisovans, which were, upright cavemen that were clearly skilled in jewelry, they had some form of an advanced civilization. So the only reason why I'm bringing that up and why I was talking about pre-Diluvian civilizations is because when you start looking into the Denisovans and you start looking into what they were capable of creating in terms of apparel, jewelry, and whatnot, you have to start asking yourself, well, what's kind of going on here? Because there seems to be almost like a reset in terms of history, technology, civilization, and you know, just something to think about when you're doing your own studies is when you start comparing the Denisovans to the Mesopotamians, there starts to get some really funny things going on here. And that includes some of the more fantastical structures here in North America, or the fact that the oldest pyramid as of to date right now is in Indonesia. So just things to keep in mind when you do your own studies into these ancient civilizations. It's just we live in a very fantastical world and something to keep in mind. But let's continue. Is it? Okay, here we go. All right. And here we have one of those the original Uruk vase dated to 3200 to 3000 BC from Mesopotamia. It's beautiful. While the Sumerian culture was predominant, there was a simple artwork in homes and people could adorn themselves with jewelry. After Mesopotamia was conquered by the Assyrians, it became massively wealthy. Large scale public artworks were created, and they were known in particular for carved stone reliefs depicting scenes from wars or hunting. Although many of these have been lost, there are several installed at the British Museum, and they are impressive to behold even today. Mesopotamian governments. As populations grew, there was a need for stronger leadership. People were needed to protect and distribute stored food and supplies, to determine and enforce laws, to organize labor, to represent their people when trading with other cities, and more. It was initially the job of priests, who were influential figures in society due to the importance of religion. Priests were the people who meditated between the world of mortals and the gods, who could help protect their livestock and ensure a successful harvest. As the need for governing grew, it was the priests who filled the power vacuum. Over time, the growing cities needed further organization, and secular leaders joined the priests in governing the city, and in particular the division of labor. The main secular leader was called Enlugel, and his role eventually became that of a monarch with a great deal of power and influence. Mesopotamia evolved into city states under the Sumerians. Each city was ruled by its own king. Although they all cooperated, they needed a complex system of government to help manage inter-city affairs, taxes, and scribes to help things run smoothly and cohesively. Mesopotamians created cuneiform. Governing and advancing such a complex network of cities and making trade deals across the land, distances meant another great leap was made. It was just a catalyst needed for the invention of writing. Mesopotamians had their own special writing form called cuneiform, which was first used around 4000 BC by the Sumerians. The name means wedge shape, which comes from the distinctive shape of the symbols, which are pressed into a slab of clay using a stylus. And here we have a image depicting Mesopotamian relief from 1865 to 1860. Here we got some cuneiform. Be a pretty badass tattoo. Although cuneiform was initially taught to only a few scribes, there is evidence that literacy was widespread in Mesopotamia after the rule of the Akkadian conqueror Sargon, Sargon, when the use of cuneiform became commonplace. There was a public library in the city of Babylon, and both men and women were taught to read and write. Hmm. Although many of the surviving cuneiform texts over pragmatic subjects such as trade deals, there are also works of fiction. The most famous of these is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale so incredible it has survived for thousands of years and is still read and enjoyed by many today. And I think we covered that lightly. I'm not sure which episode that was. The Akkadian Empire and Sargon the Great. Although early Mesopotamia was founded by the Sumerians, they were eventually conquered by the Akkadian Empire. The empire was founded by Sargon, a man who very little is known about. He believed himself to be the son of a temple priestess, though he did not know who his father was. As well as conquering Mesopotamia, he was able to take over parts of Syria, Iran, Kuwait, Jordan, Turkey, and some believe even Cyprus. He is considered to have founded the world's first successful empire, as it lasted longer than one generation when he died in 2279 BC after a 56-year reign and was replaced by his son Remush. Remush. After his death, Sargon was elevated to godlike status. He became known as Sargon the Great, and there were legends about his accomplishments and deeds. Here we have a carving of Sargon the Great, ruler of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia. The crown passed from Remush to his brother Manitsus, and then to Manitsu's son Naram Sin. Naram Sin died 110 years after his grandfather first ascended the throne, and his death marked the end of the first true dynastic empire which fell to the Amorites as a result of unrest and famine. Under the Akkadians, Mesopotamia had achieved many significant things. There were roads built between cities, and postal systems were implemented as a result of a greater levels of literacy and ties between cities. And there were improvements in farming techniques. Riches were regained, rebellions were crushed, and spectacular buildings like the Ishtar Temple in Nava were constructed. The Akkadians helped push Mesopotamian culture from interesting to legendary. Shout out to the Akkadians. Mesopotamian law. An eye for an eye and Amorite rule. Another thing Mesopotamian established was codes of law. The Amorite king Hammurabi officially instigated his code of law in 1772 BC. It's funny the way I read that, sorry. The laws were designed to encompass all the people in Mesopotamia. They were so varied in their lifestyles and beliefs that it was crucial the law code was simple, specific, and easy to interpret. The same laws had to be understood and followed by housewives in large, well off cities, as well as farmers toiling the villages. The most famous of the laws in Hammurabi's codes is the Principles of an Eye for an Eye, which was at the time a literal law designed to prevent physical fighting. Anyone who injured another person in a fight would be disfigured or even killed for their crime. People from different parts of Mesopotamia had been fighting among themselves for hundreds of years, and the law was also intended to put an end to the blood feuds which were causing problems in some parts of Mesopotamia. Although the punishments in the code of law seemed barbaric, Hammurabi was also established the principle that a person was innocent until proven guilty. Well then, look at that. The Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire is considered by many historians and archaeologists to be the greatest of the Mesopotamian empires. It was massive, bureaucratically efficient, and dominant on the battlefield. It had its roots in northern Mesopotamia in the city of Ashur, Ruins unearthed at that site suggest the site was founded in around 1900 BC, but the location was probably inhabited for a long time before this. The city was a thriving center of trade, and the wealth accumulated meant the city was a powerful force and able to expand. Here we have an image of the ancient site of Ashur in Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. Some say the Sumerians had portals, and that's why the United States went into Iraq because of some of the ancient technology that Saddam Hussein was going to put on display. Go ahead and look into it. There is some interesting evidence to point to that. But let's continue. Assyrian rule lasted hundreds of years, with sporadic interruptions by other dynasties. And yet, the influence and power held by the Assyrians and the city of Ashur meant it was able to keep reclaiming power. The final Assyrian rule over Mesopotamia is now known as the Neo Assyrian era. It marked the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age in Mesopotamia, and the Assyrians utilized new technologies such as iron weapons, giving them a massive advantage in combat against people who were still equipped with inferior bronze. The iron weapons and well trained troops made them almost impossible to defeat, and the empire began to spread further. They used war chariots and siege machines and used tactics such as ladders to scale fortified city walls. But they were more than warmongers and conquerors. Their willingness to include aspects of the cultures they were invading meant their artwork, medicinal practices, and education were all extremely advanced. The Syrian king Sennacherib moved the capital of Mesopotamia to Nevia and built an extravagant palace with gardens that were likely the hanging gardens of legend. Here we have a ancient Mesopotamian Assyrian sculpture painting. Sennacherib's grandson was Ashurbanipal, the last of the mighty Assyrian kings. His kingdom was so rich that artisans created incredible artifacts and ornamentation. Ashurbanipal himself was a ruthless leader and a very intelligent man who amassed a vast library of cuneiform texts. But Ashurbanipal's rule ended after 42 long years as cities began to rebel against the high taxes required to keep such an empire running. Hmm. Sounds all too familiar nowadays, huh? The religious world of Mesopotamia. With such a rich history and mix of cultures over the years, the Mesopotamian world was truly a fascinating one. The importance of religion at the roots of the empire never lost their significance, and the religion was at the heart of Mesopotamian life. They may have originally believed the will of the gods meant the success or failure of a harvest or hunt, but this evolved into a belief that gods had a hand in absolutely every aspect of life. They worshipped a massive pantheon of gods, with thousands of minor deities and many major gods and goddesses. Every city had its own patron god, and every situation had a god that could be called upon. Set pyramid like buildings called ziggurats were built in cities to house the patron gods. They were topped with a shrine or altar which was only accessible to priests and religious officials. And here we have an ancient ziggurat designed to house the gods of Mesopotamia. The priests and priestesses of Mesopotamia retained the power they had held for thousands of years, and they were viewed in the same regard as kings. Religion played such an important part in the lives of Mesopotamians that they considered the role of these people awe inspiring. They were the custodians of the temples and ziggurats, and the fate of the city was dependent on the priests and priestesses appeasing the gods. As in many early cultures, they also served as healers and offered both practical and spiritual assistance. Mesopotamia was truly amazing for countless reasons, from the advances in technology to introducing a complex writing system and a culture spanning thousands of years. It still fascinates many people today. The ruins and artifacts that have survived for so long are both beautiful and historically interesting, appealing to a wide audience. And everything they achieved shows just how important the switch from hunting and gathering to farming was to the future human race. And there you have it, a light introduction into the rise of ancient Mesopotamia. If you've made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.